Hey there, good morning. Welcome to the Newswire. Today, flying solo. Producer Alex is on a trip, but I'm here with you. Today, we got some hot topics. We start first. Israel. It's in the news. Last week, two individuals were murdered outside of the Israeli embassy. Man, if I can get my words right this morning. Outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. And then this weekend, there were pro-Israeli protests and or events in Colorado, and that erupted into firebombing, flamethrowing, and arrests. 8 people were injured in Colorado. Meanwhile, over the weekend, University of Denver, there was anti-Israel graffiti sprayed all over the Jewish city center. The Jewish Center. Here's where I want to go with this today. And here's part of the topics. We're going to get into something a little bit deeper later that ties into the podcast this week. But all of this domestic terrorism. Last week, we talked about Antifa in Seattle. Now we have pro-Palestine events going on where we're having graduations, people that are supporting Palestine. There was an individual I saw over the weekend at the MIT graduation where he felt quite, conflicted because he was there with his family celebrating his graduation, and the speaker was essentially casting down on Israel, making it quite the political event. His commentary and his post on social media is, I just want to come celebrate with my family and be accepted, the Jewish individual that he is. So here's where I want to go with it today. Is in the midst of all this domestic terrorism, pro-Palestine, anti-Israel, pro-Jew, whatever it may be otherwise. We have a constitutional right in this country for free speech, the First Amendment. And yet, when it harms others, I think that's where free speech obviously is conflicted. And so much that we have in this country now where police forces are often sitting at bay, unable to interact because their hands are tied. So many political leaders in their different states are choosing to just allow whatever speech goes on as long as it fits a narrative. As we saw last week with the Seattle mayor, if it was anything pro-Christian, he was against it. Those aren't the values. But yet domestic terrorism, where we attack, we have individuals arrested, 23 in Seattle. We have 8 people injured in Colorado. The gentleman being arrested was an Egyptian national who came to the United States on a tourist visa back in 2022, applied for a work visa, was granted that in 2023. That work visa expired March of 25 and has been here for the last couple months illegally. Now, whether we talk about immigration or not, the conflicting point is for individuals that choose to go and attack. Are you benefiting your country? I understand there's a place to stand up. There's a place to, bear arms. And that's the Second Amendment. But yet, is it to attack others? To attack others that maybe just have a different ideology than you? I mentioned last week in Newswire, it's one thing to have an ideology. It's another to have values. Values are not ideologies. And when our ideologies bring confrontation, I term that terrorism. It's one thing to have values. All right, let's go on to the other point for this morning to talk about is this. Over the weekend, Washington State track finals. You had other sports as well. California had their track finals. And there were several events won by transgender athletes. They were transgender males who identify as females winning in the female categories. There was other states where this occurred too. And what did so many do? In Oregon, people refused to share the podium with an athlete they deemed to be a male. I was raised where, whether it was Title IX, whether that was the experience where, we had the ability for girls to have separate events. Sure, there's mixes and matches. There's times where maybe it's not as effective. There's you go to around our communities in the country, there's a lot of co-ed sports up until 8, 9, 10 years old. And then all of a sudden, biologically, there's a difference. Oftentimes, girls are more physically advanced than boys at that age. Not always, but sometimes. And then the tables switch. One thing that I know is that this is becoming a cauldron. You have an individual that was arrested at the California State Track Championships, where an individual won 2 events, I believe, maybe 3. In the state of Washington, there was an individual who was a back-to-back state champion. And there were protesters. Whether they were voicing their First Amendment right or not is up to you to decide. If it was peaceful, possibly. But one of the things that I heard last week, 86% of our U.S. population just wants this to go away. So the voice of 14% that are making such the egregious effort to include transgender athletes, what's the cost? So often it's, there's just a few, or, no one does it for athletic advantage. And here's what I say to that. And this is a conversation that will be held. An upcoming podcast guest. This week, I drop a podcast where this topic actually comes up in our conversation. And it's been told that, people don't do this for athletic advantage. And to those that bear that, this is what I have to say. Then if that's the case, then we have to sit here and accept that there is no grooming that happens. In other words, we don't have adults that groom children for their sexual exploits or for trafficking or whatever else. And we know that's not the case because every day there are men and women that are arrested and punished for doing such, for grooming, for selling, for engaging in sexual exploitation of minors. And so if we know that that goes on, to me, it's a hard case to think that we don't have individuals that are choosing to compete as biological males in female sports for competitive advantage. Again, call me naive. I'm not saying it's every case. But here's the other thing. And so often we don't discuss this when it's females, biological females competing in male sports. It's always the other way around. It's not a two-way street. And that's what it makes so confusing is, again, in the day and age where we're looking for acceptance, what has now become a moot point 20 years ago is all of a sudden now a thing. 20 years ago, it wasn't something we discussed much. It wasn't going on. Yes, it was there. We had it, but yet it just wasn't a fixture in our society. So as I wrap all of this up in our time together, whether it is the domestic terrorism regarded to Antifa or anti-Israel, anti-Jewish protests, to the attacks, to the harming of people who are peacefully making their cause, making their statement, and then to the entire cauldron that is the transgender, which is, I'm going to boil it down, biological males competing in biological female sports. And I'm going to make this last comment in regards to the transgender. It's one thing if you're an adult and you choose to engage, right? It's another when it's a minor. And I think that's what makes it a real slippery slope for those that want to, question. You know what? Where do we make a stand? Well, we make a stand like we do in so many other cases. We don't allow adults to sexually take advantage of minors. And I think the same should be held in regards to transgender athletics. It's just my opinion, my take. Here's what I invite you. Embrace in the comments. Share your thoughts. Is this a topic how do you feel? Where are your thoughts aligned in the ability for people to have a place, but also understanding that as adults, we need to protect children from those adults who harm them, as identified so often in so many courts in this land when people are prosecuted and sentenced for taking advantage of children. And so if that goes on, it's hard for me to believe that that isn't going on as well with transgender athletes. Thanks for joining today for Newswire. As always, hit the subscribe button so that way you get notified whenever we drop new content. You're going to want to make sure that you listen to this week's podcast. We hit this topic square in the between the eyes. Yeah, that's the way to say it. As well, hit the bell and be notified whenever we drop new content. It's a Monday. Man, my tongue is tied. Thanks for being here. Thanks for bearing with me. Till next time, choose to lead with impact.